So last week we talked about karma and the motivation that defines a person on the middle scope path, which is the determination to attain total liberation from cyclic existence, not merely to settle for another fortunate birth within samsara, because that offers no lasting protection and is still prone to dissatisfaction and suffering. We talked about the 8 sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, death, being separated from what we want, meeting with what we don't want, not getting what we want even though we try very hard, and in summary, being under the control of the 5 contaminated aggregates. So I think contaminated just means under the influence of ignorance, basically. These our awareness of who we are is delusional. So continuing with that, if we become fascinated with life as a god, the god realms, we need to reflect that even the gods and demigods experience suffering. So what are gods and demigods? They're beings that take birth in very refined realms with subtle energy bodies. We can't see them unless we develop a very subtle consciousness ourselves. The karmic cause to be born in the God realm is mastering samadhi, or concentration meditation, which gives one the ability to sit in meditation for hours or even days. Once a person learns how to control all the subtle energies within the body, an experience of great bliss arises, and fantastic powers such as astral travel and clairvoyance become possible. But these powers have no lasting meaning unless we combine them with the wisdom realizing emptiness and achieve liberation. And if we also actualize the altruistic intention or bodhicitta and attain full enlightenment, we can then use these powers to benefit countless beings. But if we seek these powers without these other practices of wisdom and bodhicitta, just getting addicted to the bliss of meditation, we get born in one of the God realms, which can be a trap where one simply remains in blissful meditation all the time without developing the other mental qualities on the path. And so where's the suffering in the God realm, you might ask? There's not much noticeable suffering until the karma for that birth is almost exhausted. And then suddenly that God wakes up from their blissful slumber and realizes they're about to die and be reborn. And the only direction in samsara is down, often to the lower realms. Actually, they do talk about the suffering of sometimes the gods and the demigods are sort of get in these battles, kind of like, the uber rich billionaires, they're always quarreling with each other. And so anyways, there's still suffering in the God realms. It's basically, you're still under the influence of ignorance. So anyways, when the karma of being in the God realm is almost exhausted, it's said that their bodies begin to smell, they lose their auras, and experience great fear at that point because they get a premonition that they're about to be reborn in a less fortunate realm. So, that might sound pretty good except for the end, but being born as a human is actually considered a better situation to practice Dharma, as we have just the right balance of pleasure that keeps us from being too discouraged. And with a little bit of pain, hopefully not too much, pain and difficulty, which motivates us to practice. So now that we've covered the drawbacks of samsara, let's take another look at the suffering in samsara from a very broad perspective. The root causes of being stuck here, and the nature of the path leading to liberation. So regardless of which of the 6 realms we're in, the 3 upper realms or the 3 lower realms, our experience is defined by suffering, which is condensed into three basic types: the suffering of change, and the all-pervasive suffering. So the first kind, the suffering of suffering, is easy to understand. Basically, it's ouch. It happens whenever we encounter sense objects that we don't like, and can range from very painful physical injury to even the slightest displeasure at hearing an unpleasant sound or experiencing an unpleasant taste or smell. And the suffering of change is a bit more subtle, refers to the fact that any pleasant experience inevitably changes. If we try to hold on to that experience, eventually we become disappointed. If we are enjoying a delicious meal, but out of attachment, we continue to eat, eventually we get a stomach ache. If we overeat chronically, this could eventually result in more serious internal medical problems. The weather is another classic example. We love our summers in Seattle. We go sit in the sun, but then we get too hot. So we move back to the shade and it feels wonderful, but soon we're too cold. So we go back to the sun and so on. We all long for that perfect day when the temperature is just right, a light breeze, but not too much, no wildfire smoke in the air, no firecrackers or sirens, no cement truck at the neighbor's house belching diesel fumes and making a racket, no speeding cars on our streets and so forth. If we ever realize our perfect summer day, rarely lasts for more than a few moments until something disturbs our sense of peace. We fall in love with someone and get married, and for a while, whenever we see that person, everything is perfect and blissful, but eventually the chemical attraction wears off and the hard work of living with someone with a different desire system is what we are left with. Conflicts arise, quarrels of varying degrees, and if the marriage is to survive, we need to work on ourselves and understand the suffering of change. The all-pervasive suffering is the most subtle, and it refers to our appropriation or grasping at the five aggregates under the influence of karma and delusion. So just to review, the five aggregates are the body and four aspects of the mind. If you want to keep it really simple, you could just summarize it as over-identifying with our body and mind, creating a solid identity that centers on the body and mind instead of understanding that body and mind exist only in a conventional sense. When you look for them using ultimate analysis, investigating the teachings on emptiness, you can't find anything. That's the essential riddle that Buddha is asking us to solve. And it's where all these teachings lead us to. Basically, as long as our body and mind are in samsara, these five aggregates function as a magnet for suffering. Buddha's answer is quite simple. Drop the load of these aggregates. Stop carrying them around. To be clear, that's not an endorsement for suicide. We have to put the load of the aggregates down with our mind. It means realizing nirvana, the truth that the self lacks inherent existence. In the Prajnaparamita Sutra, known as the Heart of Wisdom Sutra, Buddha states through Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. Those are the five aggregates: form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. There is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no tactile object, no phenomenon, and so on. This is ultimate truth, the definitive teaching. These teachings aren't discussed at length, though, in the context of the middle of scope of the Lam Rim, because the intent of the Lam Rim is for practitioners to enter the highest scope and unite the wisdom mind with the method of bodhicitta. The perfection of wisdom teachings are the very last part of the Lam Rim Chenmo, and lead us through extensive philosophical debate centered on emptiness in order to avoid misunderstanding. So there are two main methods that help one generate the wish to be free from suffering. The first is contemplating the Four Noble Truths, and the second is the 12 links of interdependent origination. The Four Noble Truths are called noble because noble refers to Arya beings who have realized emptiness. Arya is another Sanskrit word, just means a noble being who's realized emptiness. The four truths are grouped in terms of two pairs of results and two pairs of causes. The first noble truth is the truth of suffering. Here again, it's important to remember that Buddhism isn't saying that life is full of misery, but as we've just explored in detail, there's no lasting happiness. In the Pali Sutras, there it states that the happiness of samsara is like licking honey on the blade of a sharp knife. One of the most basic mindfulness practices is simply being aware of suffering. And anytime you notice the mind is disappointed with life or upset over the information that the five senses are transmitting to your brain, try to acknowledge that suffering with compassion for yourself and just accept whatever is happening. In life, pain is a given, suffering is optional. If you accept the difficulty, whatever it is, your suffering will be greatly reduced, maybe even eliminated if you do powerful emptiness meditation in the moment. The Dalai Lama often remarks, if there's something you can do to change the situation, no problem. Just get busy working to change the situation. If there's nothing you can do to change the situation, then again, no problem, because the situation is out of your control. All that is required from you then is just to relax and accept. The second noble truth is the causes of suffering, delusions and karma. And of these two, delusions are the primary sources of our suffering. The third noble truth is there is an end to suffering, which is nirvana or liberation. If we realize the truth of emptiness, we can uproot the causes of suffering, which at its source is our ignorance of reality. The fourth noble truth is the truth of the path, which leads to the end of suffering, the eightfold path of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So I'll just go through those really briefly. So right view could be understood in many different ways, from having respect to karma, respect for karma and the existence of past and future lives, also recognizing the importance of learning about emptiness. Right intention is not wishing to create harm with one's body, speech, or mind. Right speech is not lying, not stirring up trouble with words, not gossiping, and so forth. Right action relates to the three physical virtues, not killing, stealing, or creating harm through sexuality. The teachings on right livelihood mention specific professions to avoid, such as being a butcher, running a gambling hall, serving alcohol, trading in weapons, but generally it means being honest and ethical in business. Right effort means not being lazy about spiritual practice, but neither being too tight and tense. Right mindfulness means guarding the sense doors of body and mind, being aware of feelings. The Satipatthana Sutra, or Four Foundations of Mindfulness, is a classic teaching which, when paired with intensive meditation retreat, is one of the most important practices in the Theravada or Pali tradition. So Theravada is kind of one of the main, different Buddhism evolved in different places in slightly different ways. And so those teachings emphasize personal liberation a bit more than the teachings on bodhicitta. And but I think today there's certainly in many of the centers in the United States, there's mutual respect for both traditions. It's not, and they're not as far apart as some of the the historical source texts would make one think. So anyways, I borrow from both traditions, as many of my friends on the path do. So, and then the last one, right concentration, is the practice of learning how to focus and quiet the mind, which is essential for developing insight or vipassana. So these 8 steps are considered to be of 3 types. Right view and right intention are related to the development of wisdom. Right speech, right action, right livelihood relates to ethical conduct. And right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration are related to meditation. To summarize the 4 truths, the first 2 describe the sickness of samsara and the causes. The second 2 describe the full potential innate to all living beings and the medicine that cures the sickness of samsara. So in order to free ourselves from suffering and stop the wheel of karma, we need to understand the delusions. So depending on which list you use, there are 3 principal delusions: ignorance, anger, and attachment. These are represented in the center of the wheel of life illustration. So yeah, in the center of the wheel of life, you can see the pig and the snake. Well, I don't know if you can see it in that drawing, it's pretty small, but there's a pig, a snake, and a rooster representing ignorance, anger, and attachment. And the snake and rooster are depicting as emerging from the mouth of the pig, showing that ignorance is the root delusion. Actually, I think pigs are pretty smart, but anyways, whoever came up with this illustration, that's what they came up with. In the Lam Rim middle scope, pride, doubt, and deluded views are also included in the list of principal delusions. Deluded views is an aspect of ignorance and has 5 parts. Anyways, I'll just expand on this drawing really quick while it's up. So in the drawing, you can see the 6 realms. So there's the God realm, and I think that's the human realm here, and maybe the demigod realm over here, and animal realm, hungry ghost realm, and then down here is the hell realm. And in more detailed drawings, it gets pretty graphic, with bodies being hacked to pieces and stuff. Around the center of these 6 realms are 12 little sections of the wheel, and those represent the 12 links of dependent origination. And the first link is ignorance, and I'll talk more about that next week. But and holding the entire wheel is this. I think he's a god. Yeah. So he's in. Anyways, he's the Lord of Death, Yama, holding this wheel. It's sort of this, reminding us that death is this fearsome monster that's coming to claim us all. And he's holding that wheel. And if we want to escape this wheel, which is the very definition of cyclic existence, going around and around in these 6 realms, impelled by these 3 main delusions and these 12 links that sort of describe our journey. If we want to escape, you look up here in the upper right corner, and there's the Buddha pointing at the moon. And the symbolism is, there is a path to follow to escape and, become a Buddha yourself. And so traditionally this drawing was always at the entrance of any temple, just to remind monks and nuns what they're there for, is trying to achieve liberation. So looking at each of those delusions, attachment is a mind that views objects or people and exaggerates their good qualities as inherently existent. We see the piece of chocolate cake or the person we are attracted to and think that the object or person is the source of our happiness. As a result, we generate clinging and attachment towards the object. And the flip side of attachment is anger. Instead of seeing good qualities, we see negative qualities as inherently existent and generate aversion, wanting to get away from objects or people, and sometimes seeking to harm them. This doesn't mean that we aren't allowed to have likes and dislikes in our life, but it's important to notice how our mind exaggerates happiness or suffering as coming from the objects and people out there in the external world, rather than from our own mind, and to recognize how these delusions destroy our happiness in the end and keep us in samsara. Objects or people will never make us happy all the time. Disagreeable experiences or people are inevitable. Can we cultivate patience and equanimity that doesn't make the situation worse by reacting to it? Can we look at things from a different angle that sees a larger picture rather than just my likes or my dislikes? Contemplate how our delusional habits keep us locked in cyclic existence. The 3rd delusion is pride, which is an inflation of our sense of self-importance and is based on our wrong view on the collection of the aggregates of body and mind. We think we are special and talented, which may be true conventionally, but if we get into the habit of feeding pride, we inevitably feed our ignorance, which misunderstands reality. The antidote to pride is to think about something we have little skill or knowledge of. In my case, I know very little American Sign Language, and though I spent a long time studying Chinese and Tibetan, I don't remember most of it. And so just thinking about things where you lack knowledge can tamp down your pride. Especially damaging is when we generate pride based on some idea that we have a high level of spiritual understanding. Thinking, for example, I've realized emptiness, or I've been meditating for years, I'm more spiritual than that person, and so forth. If we really want to generate the wisdom that understands the nature of reality, we have to eliminate this kind of thinking that inflates the ego. The 4th delusion is ignorance, and here the type of ignorance is in relationship to cause and effect, the 4 noble truths, and the 3 objects of refuge. 5th is doubt, and also refers to these topics just mentioned, although in Theravada Buddhism from Thailand and Myanmar, doubt is discussed a little bit differently in terms of our relationship to meditation practice. In general, it falls under the 5 hindrances and tends to make the mind muddy and agitated, and can be quite a sneaky mental state in meditation that we don't recognize until it's really taken control. The 6th delusion deluded views has 5 parts. First is the view of the transitory collection. Within Tibetan Buddhism, there are 4 main philosophical schools and several divisions of those. The highest view of the Prasangika Madhyamaka, or middle way consequence school, holds that this delusion refers to the tendency to view the collection of the aggregates or self as inherently existent. All the lower schools say this refers to the tendency to view the transitory collection as independently or substantially existent. So transitory just means temporary, the collection of the aggregates of body and mind. The basic difference being that the lower schools say that if you search for something within the collection of the aggregates, there is something that does exist inherently from the side of the object. This is a very subtle point that the perfection of wisdom teachings discuss at length in the Lam Rim, and commentaries by the Indian Buddhist masters such as Chandrakirti and Buddhapalita, and of course Lama Tsongkhapa, the author of the Lam Rim Chenmo. Second is extreme views of either nihilism or eternalism, saying that nothing exists or everything exists inherently. The third deluded view is holding deluded views as superior, so not simply advocating a wrong view, but also saying these views are definitely the best. Fourth is holding wrong ethics and conduct as superior. So things like practicing animal sacrifice, imagining that as a way to appease the gods, or falling into a cult such as Jim Jones, thinking that mass suicide at a certain time and date is the key to liberation. There are many possibilities here, and as you can imagine, the karma involved is horrific. Last is wrong view itself, thinking that cause and effect don't exist. There is no such thing as past and future lives, and so forth. Different sources have different descriptions of the 6 root afflictions and the 5 deluded views. I've mainly relied on the descriptions in Yangtze Rinpoche's commentary. The key point, though, is not to memorize a bunch of intellectual knowledge or obsess over which list is more correct, but to reflect on these and develop an embodied wisdom that comes from your heart. That can be a real obstacle in our path. It's definitely important to study, and the Lam Rim certainly isn't as popular as many other forms of Buddhism because on first glance it does appear overly intellectual, in my opinion. But without studying, how do we know what we are meditating on? Wisdom needs to be based in knowledge. So that concludes my summary of the suffering in the upper realms, the 4 noble truths, and the nature of the delusions. If you heard anything that seems useful, then please put it into practice. If it didn't make sense in places, please forgive my disorganized presentation, and please don't close your mind to these teachings based on my lack of skill in presenting.
So there's 3 delusions: ignorance, anger, attachments.
3 principal delusions: ignorance, anger, and attachment. And anger or aversion, attachment or desire. Those are the 3 main delusions, but there's also pride, doubt, and deluded views. There's a lot in there to contemplate.
This is what keeps you in samsara, being stuck up.
The delusions are the source of creating negative karma, and that karma causes us to take birth. I think it's also discussed in this section, and I didn't plan to go into it very much, but when we die, the mental continuum, which is difficult to talk about it, but it's like the mind. We can just say the mind stream leaves the body. I mean, it's not a thing. It's not a physical object. It's a mind stream. But anyways, that leaves the body, or the body leaves it, or something, and then enters what's called the bardo, the intermediate state between one birth and the next. And at the moment of death, a certain karma will ripen that's based on all the karma you've created in this life and previous lives. And I can't say exactly what formula causes one specific karma to ripen, but some karma will ripen that will largely determine what realm of existence you're born into in the next life, whether you're born as a human again, or whether you're born as an animal, or born as a god realm. Kind of one of the whole points of all these teachings. I mean, at the beginning, certainly at the lower scope, the first scope is to make sure that karma that ripens at the moment of our death is a virtuous karma, so that we aren't born into a suffering realm. If we're practicing the middle scope teachings at the moment of death, ideally we'd be able to recognize what's called the clear light mind, which is it's an appearance that comes and it's like our best opportunity to recognize wisdom and emptiness, and sort of wake up from samsara and achieve liberation. If we're on the highest scope, then we not only want to recognize that wisdom mind at the moment of our death, but we want to combine that with an awareness of altruism, the bodhicitta that wants to become a fully enlightened being for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so, basically, depending on how strong our practice is and kind of what our intentions are and what we've been able to internalize, because we can't carry any books with us and notebooks into the bardo. We only get to carry whatever imprints we've created in our mind stream. And we hopefully use that to take us where we want to go.
Okay.
That's all. Just.
And I guess you said this phrase, excuse me, learn about emptiness. Like, what does that exactly point to? Like,
oh yeah, right view. The first part of the Eightfold Path is right view, which is recognizing the importance of learning about emptiness. So emptiness refers to the wisdom that realizes emptiness, the wisdom mind that is the key to liberation from samsara. We have to recognize the truth. The source of our suffering is this ignorance. So what is that ignorance? It's a knowing of reality. It's misperceiving what actually exists. We see things. We see things out in the world and ourselves. We see them as existing solidly, and we create this very solid view of reality, but it's actually a misperception. Nothing exists in the way that we habitually see those things and conceive and perceive those things. And in order to eliminate that karmic ignorance, we have to develop wisdom that sees the emptiness of inherent existence. So I'm barely qualified to even talk about this, but I'm still learning. But basically, it's negating that view and not superimposing something on top of that. Give me a few more weeks to prepare my presentation on emptiness. And also, as I said, it's important to combine the teachings on emptiness. I mean, it's with the teachings on method of bodhicitta and compassion and so forth, in order to, that's the essence of the Mahayana path. The Mahayana means Maha is great, Yana is vehicle. So it's called the great vehicle, which refers to this aspiration to become a fully enlightened Buddha. And we can't become a fully enlightened Buddha just by realizing emptiness. We have to also develop the bodhicitta, this altruistic intention to become enlightened. And only then can we develop the full potential of Buddhahood. If we only just achieve liberation, we haven't yet completely eliminated these subtle obscurations that prevent us from attaining omniscience, which sounds fantastic, but fantastic, unrealistic, but this is said to be possible, to be able to develop this state of mind where you see somebody and you can instantly know how to help that person, and based on this omniscient mind. So we can aspire.